Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became Japan's #1 support item developer instead of a hero. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was ending in fire and sludge. For Izuku Midoriya, this wasn't an abstract observation. It was a sensory assault. The afternoon sun, usually a warm and pleasant blanket over the Tatooine shopping district, was choked by thick, acrid smoke that stung his eyes and clawed at the back of his throat. The cheerful cacophony of shoppers and street vendors was gone, replaced by a symphony of panic, the shrill blast of car alarms, the distant wail of approaching sirens, and the terrified shouts of the crowd that now formed a suffocating, living barricade around the disaster zone. And at the epicenter of it all, the explosions. They weren't the clean, powerful concussions he'd seen from heroes on TV. These were wet, guttural blasts, like a firecracker thrown into a mud puddle, each one spewing debris and superheated air. Izuku, small for his 14 years, was wedged between a sweating salaryman and a woman clutching her phone, her knuckles white. He should have been running away. Every sane instinct, every primal urge for self-preservation screamed at him to turn and flee. But his feet were rooted to the spot, his eyes wide and unblinking, his mind doing the one thing it had been trained to do for a decade: analyze. The villain was a monstrous entity of fluid, semi-sentient sludge, a churning mass of brackish green ooze with two malevolent, floating eyes. It had wrapped itself around a hostage, using the boy's body as both a shield and a grotesque puppet. Izuku could see the pro-heroes on the scene, but they were stymied. Kamui Woods, a rising star, couldn't use his lacquered chain prison. The villain had no solid form to bind, and the rampant fires made his wooden limbs a terrifying liability. The new heroine, Empty Lady, was present but useless. She stood awkwardly at the edge of the narrow street, her gigantification quirk a non-option in the cramped, civilian-filled space. Death Arms was trying to get close, his powerful arms ready to punch, but he couldn't get a purchase on the amorphous slime. He'd thrown a piece of a traffic light pole at the creature, but it had simply been absorbed and spat out with a wet, mocking thump. "They're not coordinating," Izuku muttered, his voice a low, frantic whisper lost in the noise. His fingers twitched, itching for the comforting weight of his notebook and a pen. Notebook no. 13 was safe in his backpack, the same one the villain had tried to steal just moments before All Might had saved him. The thought sent a jolt of residual awe and terror through him. "Why isn't anyone using a water or wind quirk?" he continued, his brain firing faster than his mouth. "Backdraft is here, he's a rescue hero, but his water stream might hurt the hostage. He needs a way to focus the pressure, a nozzle attachment that can create a high-pressure jet to blast the slime away from the victim's face without causing blunt force trauma, or a wider, gentler spray to dilute the villain's body mass." He trailed off as the sludge villain contorted, and for a horrifying second, the hostage's face was visible. Spiky, ash-blonde hair. Furious red eyes, wide not just with fear, but with a burning, desperate rage. Kaken. The world, which had already been tilted on its axis, fell away completely. The analytical part of his brain, the part that catalogued quirks and noted tactical weaknesses, slammed into the terrified, 14-year-old boy who had known Katsuki Bakugo his entire life. He saw the struggle, the silent screams trapped behind a slimy prison, the way Kaken's hands sparked with futile explosions, feeding the very fires that kept the heroes at bay. He was suffocating. He was being used as a weapon, and then their eyes met. Across the distance, through the smoke and the chaos, Izuku saw it. He saw past the arrogant bully who called him Deku. He saw past the pride and the anger. He saw a terrified kid. He saw the same look of raw, primal fear that had been on his own face just 30 minutes ago in that underpass. Izuku didn't make a decision. There was no conscious thought, no heroic resolution, no weighing of pros and cons. His brain screamed no, his muscles screamed stay, his very soul shrieked with the knowledge of his own powerlessness. But his legs, those traitorous, stupid legs, had a mind of their own. 1 second he was in the crowd, a spectator to a tragedy. The next he was past the police tape, the shouts of the heroes a distant buzz. The ground was hot beneath his worn red sneakers. The air was thick enough to chew. His bright yellow backpack, the one All Might had signed, felt impossibly heavy. An idea born of pure desperation flashed through his mind. A distraction? He needed a distraction. With a yell that was more of a squeak, he unslung his backpack and hurled it with all his might. It spun through the air, a clumsy, canary-yellow projectile, and struck the villain squarely in one of its gelatinous eyes. The eye wobbled, losing focus for a split second, and a heavy textbook spilled from the unzipped bag, poking the creature again. It was enough. The villain's grip on Kaken's mouth loosened for a fraction of a second. A gasp of air. A moment of weakness. Izuku was already there, his fingers clawing uselessly at the viscous sludge. It was like trying to dig through thick, cold tar that smelled of sewage and burnt sugar. It clung to his hands, sucking at them, trying to pull him in. "Kaken!" he screamed, his voice raw. "What the hell are you doing?" Bakugo's voice was a choked rasp, but it was laced with its signature fury. "Get the hell off me, Deku! I couldn't just stand there and watch you die!" Izuku sobbed, still digging, his nails scraping against something solid within the slime, Kaken's school uniform. He looked up, tears and smoke blurring his vision. He tried to smile, the same shaky, watery smile he always gave when he was terrified. "You looked like you were asking for help." That single, honest sentence seemed to break something in Bakugo. The fury in his eyes flickered, replaced by a stunned, raw shock. The moment was shattered by a roar that was more than sound. It was a physical force, a pressure wave that vibrated in Izuku's bones. "I really am pathetic." Izuku flinched, turning his head. All Might stood there, no longer in his shrunken form. He was a giant once more, his signature smile a grim line of self-recrimination. He had pushed past his limit, inspired by the foolish, quirkless boy's suicidal charge. Texas smash! The punch didn't even connect. The sheer air pressure it generated was a hurricane. The sludge villain was atomized, blasted away from Bakugo's body and splattered against the nearby walls. The sky, which had been gray with smoke, was instantly cleared as the wind changed direction. And then, it began to rain. Small, gentle drops, as if the heavens themselves were weeping in relief. Izuku was blown back, tumbling to the pavement. He lay there, gasping, his ears ringing, his body trembling. He had done it. He had done nothing, and yet he had done everything. He had been a catalyst. The world rushed back in. The heroes were on him in an instant, not with praise, but with harsh, panicked lectures. "Are you insane, kid? You could have been killed!" Death Arms yelled, his face grim. "There's being a fan, and then there's being a suicidal idiot. You got in our way." Kamui Woods was gentler, but his words stung just as much. "We had the situation under control. You should have left it to the professionals." Under control? Izuku thought, his mind hazy. You were just standing there. He was checked over by paramedics, pronounced miraculously unharmed, just shaken. Then came the reporters, microphones thrust in his face like weapons, but his eyes were on Kaken, who was being praised for his resilience, his powerful quirk. Bakugo shot Izuku a single look, a complex storm of rage, humiliation, and something else, something Izuku couldn't decipher. Then he turned his back. As the chaos swirled, a large hand clamped down on Izuku's shoulder. "Come with me, young man. We need to talk." It was All Might, back in his shrunken, skeletal form, steering him away from the prying eyes and into a quiet alley. The hero's presence, which had been a source of ultimate joy just an hour before, now felt heavy, ominous. They ended up on a rooftop, the city sprawling beneath them like a circuit board of lights and dreams. The wind was cold, whipping at Izuku's damp, grimy uniform. All Might sighed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across concrete, and steam billowed from his body. "I came to thank you, and to scold you," All Might began, not looking at him. "What you did was foolish and reckless. You put your own life in danger, but it was because of your intervention that I was able to act. You ran in while I stood frozen. You told me what it meant to be a hero, even when I had forgotten." Izuku's heart, which had been a leaden weight in his chest, gave a hopeful flutter. This was it. This was the moment. The symbol of peace, the #1 hero, his idol since he could form thoughts, had seen his spirit. He had seen his heart. He took a deep breath, the words he had rehearsed in his head a million times spilling out in a rush. All Might, that's been my dream my whole life. To save people with a fearless smile, just like you, so I have to ask. He clenched his fists, his entire being focused on this single, life-defining question. Even without a quirk, can I be a hero? All Might turned, his face shadowed, the hollows of his eyes deep and dark. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Izuku could hear his own heartbeat, a frantic drum against the silence of the sky. Without a quirk, All Might repeated softly. He looked down at his own frail body, at the horrifying, starburst-shaped scar visible through his tattered shirt. I'm a hero who is constantly laying his life on the line. I'm not smiling out of happiness, kid. It's a mask to hide the fear and pressure I feel. And even with a powerful quirk, I ended up like this. He looked Izuku dead in the eye, and the boy felt his world begin to fracture. Pro-heroes are always risking their lives. Some villains can't be beaten without raw power. Without a quirk, you'd be a liability. You'd die in an instant. The words were not cruel. They were delivered with a weary, soul-crushing realism that was far more devastating than any insult Kaken had ever hurled at him. It wasn't malice. It was a statement of fact from the one person whose opinion mattered most. No, the single syllable was a gunshot in the quiet. It echoed in Izuku's ears, shattering the fragile hope he had clung to for a decade. The world didn't just tilt, it crumbled into dust. The vibrant colors of the cityscape below faded to a monotonous gray. The wind felt like ice against his skin. It's not a bad thing to dream, young man. All Might continued, his voice now sounding distant, muffled, as if coming from underwater. But you have to be realistic. If you want to help people, there are other ways. You could become a police officer. They get a bad rap because they're often sidelined for heroes, but it's a fine and respectable profession. You could become a doctor, a paramedic. There are countless ways to save lives that don't involve throwing yourself into a fight you can't win. Consolation prizes. He was being offered consolation prizes. Izuku didn't say anything. He couldn't. His throat was a knot of unshed tears and broken dreams. He just stared, his eyes blank, seeing nothing. Well, All Might said, the sound of his footsteps unnaturally loud. I have to get this guy to the station. And I'm out of time. The metal door to the rooftop stairwell clanged shut, a sound of absolute finality. Izuku stood there. For how long, he didn't know. Time had lost all meaning. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the clouds in brilliant shades of orange and purple, a beautiful funeral pyre for his aspirations. He was alone, a ghost on a rooftop, haunted by the echo of a single word, no. The walk home was a blur. He moved on pure autopilot, his feet scuffing the pavement with a rhythm of despair. No. 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 Each step was a hammer blow to his soul. He vaguely registered the sound of more explosions in the distance, back in the direction of the shopping district. He saw people pointing, some even running back that way. Another villain attack, maybe? It didn't matter. Nothing mattered. He was so lost in the gray fog of his grief that he completely missed it. He missed the news reports that would later speak of the sludge villain's miraculous escape from the bottle All Might was carrying. He missed the second desperate struggle. He missed the moment when All Might, truly and utterly spent, would find a worthy vessel, a successor to carry the sacred torch of one for all. He missed the moment his destiny was handed to someone else. By the time he reached the door to his small apartment, night had fallen. He fumbled with the key, his hands shaking. Izuku? Is that you? I saw the news, I was so worried. His mother, Inko Midoriya, rushed to the door, her face a mask of frantic concern. She fussed over him, checking for injuries, her hands fluttering like nervous birds. He led her, his body pliant and unresponsive. I'm fine, Mom, he mumbled, the words tasting like ash. He trudged to his bedroom and closed the door, shutting out her worried questions. And then he saw it. His room wasn't a bedroom. It was a shrine. A monument to a colossal, lifelong mistake. All Might was everywhere. Posters of his Silver Age costume, his Bronze Age debut, his current Modern Age suit. Action figures in dynamic poses lined every shelf, their plastic smiles seeming to mock him. The bedsheets, the curtains, the lamp, even the alarm clock, all emblazoned with the V-shaped crest of the symbol of peace. It was suffocating. It was the physical manifestation of a lie he had told himself for 10 years. You can be a hero. He looked at his own reflection in the glass of a framed poster. A small, pathetic boy with wild green hair, big, tear-filled eyes, and a trembling lip. A Deku. A useless, quirkless Deku who had just been told by God himself that he was unworthy. Something inside him snapped. The first sob was a raw, guttural sound torn from the depths of his being. It was followed by another, and another, until he was on his knees, his body racked with violent, silent shudders. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight on his chest that made it impossible to breathe. He wanted to scream. He wanted to tear every last poster from the walls, to smash every smiling figurine into 1,000 pieces, to burn the room to the ground and erase the very memory of his foolish dream. His eyes fell on his school bag, lying discarded by his desk. Protruding from the top was the singed, slightly damp corner of Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13, the source of it all. The proof of his delusion. A dozen notebooks filled with obsessive scribbles, frantic analyses, childish drawings. All of it worthless. All of it a joke. He staggered to his feet, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He snatched the notebook, his knuckles white. The garbage can in the corner of his room seemed to call to him. This was the first thing to go, this symbol of his wasted life. He would throw it away, and then he would tear down the posters, and then he didn't know. Maybe he would just lie down and let the grayness consume him. His hand was poised over the bin. But he hesitated. One last look. One final, masochistic glance at the pages of his folly. He opened it to a random page, his vision blurred by tears. It was his entry on Kamui Woods. He'd written it just last week. He expected to see fanboyish praise, gushing over the hero's cool ultimate move. But that's not what was there. Kamui Woods, Quirk Arbor. Allows manipulation and generation of wood from his body. Strengths. Excellent for large-scale capture and mobility in urban environments. Lacquered chain prison is effective against most humanoid villains. Weaknesses. Highly vulnerable to fire and cutting attacks. Limited effectiveness against non-solid or amorphous opponents. Relies on existing structures for complex maneuvers. Support item proposals. 1. Fire retardant lacquer, a spray-on or integrated coating for his wooden limbs. Could be based on aerogel composites for heat resistance without adding significant weight. This would mitigate his primary elemental weakness. 2. Deployable spikes/nets. Instead of just large branches, what if he could launch smaller, faster projectiles? A net of woven wood fibers to ensnare flying enemies, or hardened spikes for precision strikes. Requires modification of his gauntlets to focus the quirk's output. 3. Flashbang integration, for disorientation. A small, non-lethal device mounted on his wrist could stun an opponent with a fire-based quirk before they can attack, giving him the opening he needs. Izuku stared at the page, his breath catching in his throat. He flipped to another page, one on Empty Lady. Empty Lady, quirk, gigantification. Weaknesses. Extreme collateral damage in dense urban areas. Primary weakness, as seen in her debut. Lack of maneuverability in enclosed spaces. Costume is standard spandex, offering no real protection at her full size. Support item proposals. 1. Impact reactive armor panels. Lightweight, flexible plates integrated into her costume. Upon gigantification, they expand and lock, providing protection against projectiles and softening impacts with buildings. Could use non-Newtonian fluid pockets that harden on impact. 2. Enhanced sonar visor. A visor that emits high-frequency sound waves, giving her a 3D view of her surroundings, including building layouts and civilian locations. This would allow her to move with more precision and minimize accidental damage. She could see through walls to anticipate threats. He kept flipping. Page after page. For Death Arms, he designed high-friction polymer alloy gauntlets to improve his grip on irregular surfaces. For Endeavor, he theorized a complex cooling system woven into his suit to help regulate his body temperature during prolonged use of his quirk, mitigating the risk of overheating. For Eraserhead, whose entry was filled with frantic question marks. He'd speculated on goggles that could counteract the glare from explosions and analyze quirk signatures to identify the most dangerous target. In a group, the tears slowed. The crushing grief in his chest began to recede, replaced by a strange, new feeling. A dawning, electric realization. This wasn't just hero worship. This wasn't a fanbase diary. This was analysis. It was tactical breakdown. It was problem solving. It was engineering. It was a decade of observing, learning, and instinctively, subconsciously, trying to fix the problems he saw. He hadn't been dreaming of being the heroes. He had been dreaming of making them better. All Might's words came back to him, but they sounded different now, twisted into a new shape. Pro-heroes are always risking their lives. Yes. They were. But what if they didn't have to risk them so much? What if Kamui Woods hadn't been helpless against the fire? What if Death Arms had been able to get a proper hold on the villain? What if a hero with the right quirk had been equipped with a device to safely neutralize the situation from the start? Some villains can't be beaten without raw power, maybe. But power was useless if it couldn't be applied correctly. Power was just brute force. What heroes needed was efficiency, safety, precision. The right tool for the right job. He couldn't provide the power, but he could build the tools. A tremor ran through him, but it wasn't from sadness. It was from a spark. A tiny, defiant spark igniting in the cold, dead ashes of his old dream. He looked at his reflection in the poster again. The crying boy was gone. In his place was someone else. Someone with a fire in his eyes that had nothing to do with admiration and everything to do with purpose. He couldn't be the one standing in the spotlight, smiling in the face of danger. All Might was right. That path was closed to him forever. The mirror of that dream was shattered, lying in irreparable pieces on the floor of his soul. But you could take shattered glass and build a mosaic. You could take the broken pieces and forge them into something new. Something sharper. Something stronger. He couldn't be the hero, but he could build for them. He could be their shield. He could be their weapon. He could be the unseen mind in the workshop, the silent partner in every victory. He could save them, so they could save everyone else. He could still save people with a smile, not his own, but the smiles of the countless heroes he would empower, the smiles of the civilians they would rescue because of him. The idea was so immense, so powerful, it felt like it was going to tear him apart. It was a purpose forged not from a gifted quirk or a desire for fame, but from the bitter dregs of rejection and the pure, analytical power of his own mind. With a hand that was now perfectly steady, Izuku Midoriya walked to his desk. He ignored the All Might lamp, the All Might pen holder. He picked up a simple, fine-tipped red pen. He opened the notebook to the title page, to the childish scrawl that read, Hero Analysis for the Future. He drew a clean, straight line through the words for the future. Then, with a newfound razor-sharp focus, he wrote a new title underneath. The letters were neat, precise, and filled with a resolve that felt more real than anything he had ever known. Hero Support Analysis Blueprints. He didn't stop there. He turned to a fresh page and began to write, not in the frantic scrawl of a fan, but with the measured precision of an inventor. The ideas that had been abstract proposals were now becoming concrete. He started sketching, his hand moving with a life of its own. Material compositions. Power source calculations. Stress test diagrams. His dream wasn't dead. It hadn't been shattered. It had been redefined. 3 years later, the smell of ozone and hot metal hung heavy in the air, a sharp, industrial incense that had long ago replaced the scent of old paper and dust in his life. The room was a controlled chaos of wires, schematics taped to the walls, and half-assembled devices cluttering every available surface. This small workshop, converted from an old garage, was Izuku Midoriya's entire world. A pair of safety goggles was pushed up on his forehead, holding back a mop of green hair that was now longer, unruly, and perpetually home to a few flecks of metal shavings. At 17, he was still lean, but the soft, round face of his youth had given way to sharper angles. His hands, once clumsy and ink-stained, were now calloused and sure, moving with practiced grace as he guided a soldering iron across a complex circuit board. A fine wisp of smoke curled up towards the ventilation fan humming overhead. A smudge of black grease decorated his left cheek like a strange birthmark. Izuku! Dinner's ready! Don't let it get cold! His mother's voice, a familiar and comforting anchor from the house, cut through his intense concentration. Coming, Mom! He called back, his voice slightly hoarse. He carefully placed the soldering iron back in its stand and leaned back, stretching his arms over his head with a satisfying crack from his shoulders. His eyes surveyed his work with a critical but pleased expression. On the workbench before him, and on the desk beside it, lay the tangible fruits of his redefined dream. Taped to the wall was a detailed, computer-aided design schematic for a pair of sleek, green and black gloves. The title at the bottom read Project, Air Force, Pressurized Air Gauntlets Mk3. Below it, another set of blueprints detailed reinforced footwear with integrated electromagnetic coils. The title, Iron Sole Boots, Magnetic Adhesion Impact Distribution System. He was no longer the boy who dreamed of being all might. He was the young man who was quietly, methodically, and brilliantly revolutionizing the very tools his heroes used. He was the ghost in the machine, the architect behind the armor. He was Midoriyan, a name that was just beginning to be whispered in the RD departments of hero agencies, an anonymous prodigy whose designs were years ahead of the curve. He looked at the wall, past the schematics, to the single item he'd kept from his old room. A small, framed photo of a smiling All Might. It wasn't a shrine anymore. It was a reminder of the day his world broke, and the day he learned how to build a new one from the pieces. With a small, genuine smile of his own, Izuku took off his goggles, wiped his greasy hands on a rag, and went inside for dinner. His work was never done. The fire that had been ignited in Izuku Midoriya on that desolate rooftop was a demanding, insatiable thing. It was no longer the soft, hopeful glow of admiration, but the white-hot flame of a forge, hungry for fuel. For the first year after his epiphany, he consumed knowledge like air. His meager allowance, once saved for hero merchandise, was now funneled into textbooks on material science, engineering principles, physics, and advanced mathematics. The public library became his second home, the librarians knowing him by name as he devoured their entire technical section. He taught himself coding, CAD software, and electrical engineering through online tutorials, his nights illuminated by the blue glare of his monitor. His notebooks, now numbering past 20, were no longer just analytical. They were filled with complex schematics, stress calculations, and chemical formulas. But for all his theoretical genius, Izuku was keenly aware of a gaping chasm in his abilities. A blueprint was just a piece of paper. A simulation was just code. To turn his ideas into reality, he needed more than a brain. He needed hands. He needed to learn the alchemy of creation, the feel of metal under a file, the precise heat of a perfect weld, the delicate art of wiring a circuit board without frying it. He needed a master. At 15, with the same burning determination that had once propelled him toward UA High, he began his search. He applied for internships and apprenticeships at every major support company in the region. Dednarat, a corporate giant famous for its lifestyle support items, sent back a form letter rejection within a day. Yairo Zakriati Corp., a leader in bespoke hero equipment, politely informed him that their apprentices were selected from exclusive technical academies. He even applied to the support division of Endeavor's agency, only to be stonewalled by an automated system that filtered out applicants without registered quirks related to technology or creation. The pattern was as clear as it was disheartening. The world saw his application, saw the word quirkless, and saw a dead end. They didn't see the gigabytes of data in his head, the revolutionary designs gathering digital dust on his hard drive. They saw a blank space where power was supposed to be. The rejection letters were a new kind of rooftop lecture, a quieter, more bureaucratic no. Frustration gnawed at him. He could design a suit to help a hero withstand a 5-ton impact, but he couldn't get past the receptionist. One sweltering afternoon, after another fruitless email exchange, Izuku slammed his laptop shut. He needed air. He walked aimlessly, letting his feet carry him away from the familiar streets and into an older, forgotten part of Muzidafu. Here, the sleek, modern architecture gave way to Showa-era buildings, their facades weathered and stained with time. It was a neighborhood of narrow alleyways, tangled power lines, and small, family-run shops that smelled of sawdust and old grease. He turned a corner and stopped. Tucked between a shuttered laundromat and a dusty antique store was a small, unassuming workshop. The sign above the garage-style door was faded, the paint peeling, but the words were still legible: Tetsu Tools Tinkering. Below it, in smaller, hand-painted letters, it read, Heroes Support Item Repair Custom Fabrication. No job too small, no ego too big. A flicker of interest cut through his gloom. It was a relic, a holdout from a bygone era before massive corporations dominated the support industry. A place like this wouldn't have an automated HR department. A place like this might just have a person. He peered through the grimy window. The inside was a cavern of organized chaos. Tools hung from pegboards in precise arrangements, covering every inch of wall space. A massive forge, cold and silent, dominated the back corner. Workbenches were laden with dismantled hero gear, a hero's gauntlet with its wiring exposed, a cracked visor, a boot with a malfunctioning jet. And in the center of it all, a man stood hunched over a workbench, his back to the door. He was built like a retired powerlifter, with thick, muscular arms and a broad back. His graying hair was tied back in a short, messy ponytail, and his bare arms were a road map of old scars and burn marks. As Izuku watched, the man picked up a delicate piece of electronics with a pair of tweezers and brought a soldering iron to it. A tiny bead of silver solder flowed perfectly, impossibly, from the tip of the iron and settled into a perfect, gleaming joint. There was no tremor in his hand, no hesitation. It was the work of a master. Taking a deep breath that did little to calm the frantic hammering in his chest, Izuku pushed open the door. A small bell, crusted with rust, chimed weakly. The man didn't look up. If you're here for a toaster, I don't do home appliances. If you're here about the damage to Slidango's hoverboard, tell him he should have paid for the reinforced axle like I told him to. His voice was a low growl, like gravel churning in a cement mixer. No, sir, Izuku squeaked, his voice cracking. He mentally kicked himself. Sound confident, not like a lost child. He cleared his throat. I'm here about an apprenticeship. The man finally paused. He set his tools down with deliberate care and turned around. His face was as weathered as the building, with deep lines etched around his eyes and a prominent scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He looked Izuku up and down, his gaze sharp and appraising. He wasn't just looking, he was scanning, analyzing. Apprenticeship? Kid, this isn't a school. This is a workshop. I fix what gets broken. I don't have time to babysit. He gestured vaguely at the clutter. I'm a one-man operation. I know, Izuku said, taking a step forward, his desperation overriding his nervousness. That's why I'm here. I can help. I'm a fast learner, I'm hardworking, and I can organize all your inventory, clean the forge, sweep the floors, anything you need. I just want to learn. The man, Tetsu, crossed his powerful arms. And what makes you think you're qualified to learn this trade? What's your quirk? Let me guess, minor telekinesis for holding screws? Precision heat in your fingertips. Izuku's heart sank. It always came down to this. I don't have a quirk, sir. Tetsu's expression didn't change, but a certain light in his eyes dimmed. No quirk, he repeated, the words flat. Kid, do you know what this is? This is hero support. It's high-stakes, high-pressure work. A faulty joint, a bad weld, a miscalculation in material strength, that gets someone killed. The heroes who come to me, they're not the top tenors with corporate sponsors. They're the street-level guys, the ones who get their hands dirty. They rely on their gear to keep them alive. It takes more than just being a fast learner. He turned his back, a clear dismissal. Go home, kid. Join a robotics club. The rejection was a physical blow. But this time, something was different. This wasn't a faceless corporation. This was one man. One man he might be able to convince. Izuku thought of his notebooks, of the years of work. He couldn't walk away now. Wait, he blurted out. Please, just look at this. He unslung his backpack, pulled out Hero Support Analysis Blueprints, number 21, and slapped it down on the workbench. It fell open to a recent entry. Tetsu grunted in annoyance but glanced down. His eyes, initially dismissive, narrowed slightly. On the page was a detailed schematic for a variable friction sole for a hero who could manipulate concrete. Izuku had designed it to allow the hero to instantly shift from near frictionless sliding to a dead stop, using micropolymer filaments that would extend and retract based on electrical charge. The design included power consumption charts, material stress analysis, and even a mock-up of the user interface integrated into the hero's boot. Tetsu's gruff exterior cracked. He reached out a callous finger and traced one of the power conduits on the diagram. This routing, you're accounting for potential EMP interference by shielding the primary capacitor. Smart. He flipped the page. A design for heat-dispersing bracers for a hero with a minor fire quirk. He flipped again. A high-tension, self-spooling grappling hook with a gyroscopic stabilizer. He picked up the notebook, his movements now slow and deliberate. He flipped back to the beginning, then to the end, his eyes scanning the pages with an intensity that made Izuku hold his breath. He saw the progression from rough sketches and wild ideas to polished, professional-grade blueprints. He saw the mind behind the drawings. After a long, heavy silence, he closed the notebook and placed it gently back on the bench. He looked at Izuku, truly looked at him, for the first time. The dismissiveness was gone, replaced by a deep, grudging respect. Who taught you to draft like this? I taught myself, Izuku stammered. Online courses, textbooks. Tetsu grunted again, a different kind of sound this time. It held a note of disbelief, of awe. And the analysis? The understanding of quirk synergy, of tactical application? I've always watched heroes. Tetsu stared at him for another long moment, then let out a slow, heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years. The name's Kenji Tetsu, he said, extending a hand that could have crushed stone but was surprisingly gentle. I used to be a pro. Hero name was Forge. My quirk is perfect solder. I can create a flawless molecular bond in any metal I'm physically touching. Useless in a fight, but damn good for repairs. Izuku took the offered hand, his own disappearing into Kenji's massive grip. Izuku Midoriya, be here tomorrow. 6 a.m. sharp, Kenji said, turning back to his workbench. You'll start by sweeping. And you'll keep sweeping until this place is spotless. Then you'll organize every last nut, bolt, and resistor in this shop. If I ask you for a 4.7 kilo-ohm resistor, you'd better be able to find it in 10 seconds. You won't touch a single piece of hero gear for 6 months. Understand? Izuku felt a grin spread across his face, so wide it hurt his cheeks. It was the most beautiful, most wonderful string of demands he had ever heard. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. And Midoriya, Kenji added, not looking at him. Don't call me sir. Call me Master Tetsu. You want to be an apprentice, you follow the old ways. That night, Izuku didn't sleep. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, the scent of ozone and hot metal still clinging to his clothes, a perfume of victory. The next 2 years were a crucible. Master Tetsu was a harsh, unforgiving, and brilliant teacher. He was a man of few words, believing that the hands learn best through repetition. Izuku swept, cleaned, and organized until he knew the workshop better than his own bedroom. He learned the language of the tools not from a manual, but from the feel of them in his hands, the heft of a hammer, the bite of a file, the hum of a lathe. He made mistakes. He overheated a titanium plate until it warped. He wired a power cell backward, resulting in a small, contained explosion that singed his eyebrows and earned him a week of nothing but cleaning the forge. He cut his hands, burned his fingers, and experienced soul-crushing frustration when a complex piece refused to fit. But through it all he learned. Master Tetsu would watch him, silent and observant. He wouldn't offer praise easily, but he would appear at Izuku's shoulder just as he was about to make a critical error, tapping a schematic with a grimy finger. Check your tolerances, kid. You're off by 1/100th of a millimeter. That's the difference between a working joint and a catastrophic failure at 10,000 feet. Izuku absorbed it all. His theoretical knowledge began to merge with practical skill. He could now see the schematics in his head and understand the physical reality of building them, the weight of the materials, the space the components would occupy, the delicate dance of assembly. His hands, once soft and clumsy, became steady and sure. He could solder a circuit board with the precision of a surgeon and mill a piece of alloy to perfect specifications. One afternoon, a hero came into the shop. He was a barrel-chested man in a worn leather jacket, his face kind but weary. His hero name was Crust, and his quirk allowed him to secrete a brittle, shell-like substance over his skin, forming a temporary, rock-like armor. Tetsu-san, the hero said with a sigh, placing a pair of shattered gauntlets on the counter. Another villain with a sledgehammer. My carapace can take the hits, but my hands can't. I can't get a good grip to pull people from rubble, and my own quirk makes my fingers too clumsy for delicate work. Master Tetsu grunted sympathetically. It was a common problem, a powerful quirk with a debilitating side effect. While the master began examining the damaged gauntlets, Izuku, who had been quietly working at his own bench, felt that familiar spark ignite in his brain. He pulled out a fresh notebook. Later that evening, after Crust had left, Izuku approached his master. Master Tetsu, he said, his voice quiet but confident. I have an idea for Hero Crust. He laid the notebook on the workbench. Kenji looked down. It wasn't just a repair suggestion. It was a complete redesign. Project, Carapace Gauntlets. Problem, user's quirk provides excellent defense but severely limits manual dexterity and grip strength, especially in rescue scenarios. Standard gloves are ineffective over the rocky carapace. Solution, a pair of custom-fitted, articulated gauntlets made from a lightweight carbon fiber composite. Internal system, a soft, gel-filled inner lining conforms to the user's quirk-generated carapace, providing stability. External plating. The articulated plates mimic the full range of motion of a human hand. Grip enhancement. The fingertips and palms are coated with a high-friction gecko grip polymer, allowing for a secure hold on smooth or irregular surfaces like wet steel or crumbling concrete. Secondary feature. The silkworm line. A high-tensile, polyaramid fiber line, just 2 mm thick but with a tensile strength of 800 kg, housed in a self-spooling winch on the back of the gauntlet. Can be fired with a small, compressed air launcher for rescue or traversal. Kenji studied the design for a long time, his expression unreadable. The power source for the winch? Miniaturized kinetic battery, Izuku replied instantly. It charges from the user's movements. Every step he takes, every arm swing, powers the device. It's completely self-sufficient. Kenji looked from the notebook to the earnest, focused face of his apprentice. He saw the boy he had met 2 years ago, but he also saw the brilliant inventor standing before him now. Build a prototype, Kenji said, a rare, faint smile touching his lips. Use the scrap materials from bin 7. And don't mess it up. For the next week, Izuku worked with a feverish intensity. He milled the carbon fiber, molded the polymer grips, and painstakingly assembled the miniature winch mechanisms. It was the first time his own design, born from his analysis, was taking physical form at his own hands. When it was done, the gauntlets were beautiful. They were sleek, black, and utterly professional, looking like something from a top-tier support company, not a back-alley workshop. When Crust returned, Master Tetsu presented the gauntlets to him. My apprentice had an idea, was all he said. Crust looked skeptical but tried them on. They slid over his carapace-covered hands with a satisfying click. He flexed his fingers. The articulated plates moved in perfect sync. He picked up a heavy wrench from the workbench, his grip sure and solid. His eyes went wide. This is incredible, he breathed. He aimed the gauntlet at a beam across the workshop, and with a soft pft, a thin, strong line shot out and wrapped around it. Tetsu-san, what do I owe you? Consider it a field test, Kenji grunted, waving a dismissive hand. Just let us know how it goes. They didn't have to wait long. A week later, a news report flashed across the small television in the corner of the workshop. A 5-story apartment building had suffered a catastrophic structural failure after a villain battle. Firefighters were struggling to reach a family trapped on the top floor, and then the camera zoomed in. A single hero was scaling the sheer, crumbling wall. It was Crust. He was moving with a speed and confidence that was breathtaking. He fired a grapple line, swung across a dangerous gap, and used his high-friction gloves to pry open a twisted steel beam. The footage showed him carrying a small child in one arm while supporting himself with the other, his grip on the precarious ledge unwavering. He saved the entire family. In a post-rescue interview, his face smudged with soot but beaming, he held up a gauntlet to the camera. "I've always been a defensive hero," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But today, the gear made the hero. I don't know who the genius is at Tetz's workshop, but you didn't just give me new tools. You gave me a new way to save people." "Thank you." Izuku stood in the workshop, watching the screen, his heart swelling with a kind of pride he had never known. It was a purer, more profound feeling than any daydream of public adoration. He hadn't been on that wall. He hadn't faced the danger. But his mind, his hands, his work, he had been there. He had helped save those people. Kenji clapped a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Good work, kid," he said, his voice rough with pride. "You made a promise with that gear, and you kept it." He gestured to the door. "Now go. There's a support tech convention downtown. The iExpo Prelude. Go see what the big corporations are doing. It's time you saw what your competition looks like." The convention center was a different universe. It was a sprawling, glittering temple of technology, a stark contrast to the gritty reality of the workshop. The air hummed with the sound of servo motors and crackled with announcements from overhead speakers. Sleek, corporate booths showcased polished, mass-produced support items. Representatives in sharp suits gave slick presentations about market synergy and branding. Izuku felt a familiar sense of being an outsider. He was just a boy in a grease-stained work jacket, wandering through a world of chrome and capital. He saw a lot of impressive tech, but most of it felt sterile. It was designed for marketability, for flash, not for the specific, desperate needs of a hero like Crust. Then he heard it. A loud, booming voice that cut through the polite murmur of the crowd. "Behold, my beautiful babies! Gaze upon the future of aerial mobility." Izuku turned towards the commotion. In the center of a less polished, more chaotic section of the expo floor reserved for independent inventors, a small crowd had gathered, and in the center of that crowd was a girl. She had a wild mane of pink hair styled into dreadlocks, and a pair of yellow, zoom-lens goggles were perched on her forehead. Her face was smudged with soot, and she wore a grease-stained jumpsuit. She was gesturing wildly at a pair of large, clunky-looking hover boots. Boom! A small, contained explosion erupted from one of the boots, sending a shower of harmless sparks over the startled onlookers. The girl just cackled, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. "See! Unparalleled propulsive power! My Jet Boost boots can get a hero to a crisis scene 37% faster than any other model on the market. Who wants to be the first to invest in the genius of Mei Hatsum?" Izuku, drawn in by her sheer manic energy, moved closer. His analytical eye immediately started scanning her invention. The propulsion system was impressive, a novel combination of compressed air and chemical accelerants. But his gaze fell on the energy pack strapped to the side. The wiring was exposed, the heat sinks were too small for the power output she was claiming, and the primary power cell was a model known for its volatility under stress. Without thinking, he spoke up, his voice cutting through her presentation. "Your thermoregulation is insufficient." Mei Hatsum stopped mid-sentence and swiveled her head, her zoom lenses clicking as she focused on him. "What did you say, side character Kuin?" "Your heat sinks," Izuku elaborated, stepping forward, his shyness forgotten in the face of flawed engineering. "They can't possibly dissipate the waste heat from a full power burn for more than 30 seconds. The power cell will overheat, causing a critical failure. And your energy conduits are unshielded. One stray EMP blast, and those boots become a pair of very expensive, very explosive paperweights." The crowd murmured. Mei's wide, manic grin didn't falter, but her eyes, visible behind the lenses, sharpened with interest. "Oh? An expert are we?" she challenged, hopping off her podium. She got right in his face, her energy a palpable force. "And what would you suggest, Mr. Know-It-All? Encasing them in lead? That would compromise the weight-to-thrust ratio." "You don't need lead," Izuku shot back, his own passion rising to meet hers. "Use a braided carbon nanotube mesh for shielding. It's lighter and more effective, and for the heat sinks, instead of a passive system, integrate a small, circulatory network of non-conductive coolant. You could vent the heat through microfiber ports in the sole. It would be more efficient and safer. May stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. Her zoom lenses clicked again, zooming in on his face, then his hands, then the grease stain on his jacket. Her grin returned, wider and more genuine this time. A circulatory coolant system, a nanotube mesh. She mused, tapping a finger against her chin. That's brilliant. It would increase the production cost by 12%, but the increase in sustained operational time and safety would be exponential. What's your name? Izuku Midoriya. Izuku Midoriya, she declared, grabbing his hand and shaking it vigorously. I'm May Hatsum, inventor extraordinaire. Your ideas are almost as good as mine. We must argue about schematics immediately. Before he could process what was happening, she was dragging him behind her booth, shoving a tablet into his hands that was already loaded with the blueprints for her hover boots. For the next hour, they didn't see the convention. They were in their own world, a high-speed whirlwind of technical jargon, frantic sketching, and passionate debate. He argued for safety and efficiency. She argued for power and innovation. He was a scalpel, she was a sledgehammer. They were polar opposites, and they understood each other perfectly. It was the first time Izuku had ever met someone who spoke his language so fluently. It was exhilarating. He left the convention that evening with his mind buzzing with new ideas and a new, explosive rival friend. He returned to the quiet, familiar scent of the workshop feeling more inspired than ever. He walked over to his personal workbench, which was now a respectable space of his own, and powered on his computer. The success with Crust's gauntlets, the validating conversation with his master, the exhilarating clash of minds with May Hatsum, it all coalesced into a single, clear thought. He was no longer just an apprentice. He was an inventor. He opened the National Business Registry website. His fingers, sure and steady, typed in the information. Company name, Midorian Innovations. He paused, a small smile on his face. He shortened it. Company name, Midorian Innovations MI. He filled out the rest of the forms, his heart beating a steady, confident rhythm. He was 17 years old, quirkless, and operating out of a back-alley workshop. But he had a mind full of blueprints, hands that could build them, and a purpose that burned brighter than any forge. He finished the registration and leaned back. His work with Crust had crystallized an idea he'd been refining for months. A way to manage the recoil and self-damaging aspects of powerful quirks. He opened his design software and pulled up a file. He spent another hour refining the schematics, writing the technical description, and attaching his simulation data. Then, he navigated to the patent office's online portal. With a final, decisive click, he submitted his first official application. He shut down the computer and stood up, stretching in the quiet workshop. The moon cast a silver glow through the grimy window, illuminating the tools that now felt like extensions of his own body. He was tired, but it was a good kind of tired. A deep, satisfying exhaustion that came from a day of purpose-driven work. A week later, an email arrived. He opened it, his breath held. From Japan Patent Office. Subject, Application Status Update. Dear Mr. Midoriya, we are pleased to inform you that your application has been reviewed and approved. Congratulations on your first official patent. Patent 731855. Kinetic Recoil Dampening Energy Redirection System. Izuku read the words over and over. A patent. His name. His idea. It was real. It was official. Midorian Innovations was no longer just a name on a form. It was a recognized entity. It was the beginning. The patent was a key, but it didn't magically open any doors. For months, Midorian Innovations remained a name on a piece of digital paper, a one-man company operating out of the quiet shadows of Tetsu's workshop. Izuku continued his apprenticeship, honing his craft under his master's watchful eye, his days filled with the familiar scent of metal and the rhythm of creation. But his nights were his own, devoted to MI. He filled terabytes of hard drive space with designs, from the grand and revolutionary to the small and practical. He had blueprints for a better world, but they were still trapped in the digital realm. The problem was trust. The hero support industry was a closed ecosystem, a fortress built on reputation and long-standing relationships. The top-tier heroes were locked into exclusive contracts with corporate giants like Detonarat. Mid-tier heroes were cautious, unwilling to bet their lives on unproven technology from an unknown entity, and the lower-tier heroes, the ones most in need of an edge, simply couldn't afford custom fabrication. Izuku was stuck in a paradox. He needed a reputation to get commissions, but he needed commissions to build a reputation. The breakthrough came, as they often do, not with a bang, but with a drip. His name was Sosaki Shino, known on the streets as the pro-hero, Manuel. He was a solid, reliable B-lister, ranked somewhere in the low 200s. His quirk allowed him to manipulate any water he was physically touching, but it was a clumsy power. He could create powerful jets from his fingertips, but they were wide and difficult to control, more like a fire hose than a scalpel. He excelled at crowd control and putting out fires, but in combat or delicate rescue situations, he was a liability. The sheer force of his water streams caused immense collateral damage, and he couldn't fine-tune the pressure enough to, say, wash debris off a trapped civilian without bruising them. Manuel was a regular at Tetsu's workshop, mostly for minor repairs to his standard-issue costume. He was a humble man, perpetually apologetic about the limitations of his own power. "It's like trying to write your name with a paint roller, Tetsu-san," he sighed one afternoon, setting a water-damaged communicator on the counter. "I see a problem. I know how I could help, but my quirk is just too blunt." Izuku, quietly filing a piece of scrap metal in the corner, paused. He had seen Manuel in action several times. He'd filled half a notebook with an analysis of the hero's quirk, identifying the exact problem Manuel was describing. The issue wasn't the power, it was the interface. Later that evening, long after Manuel had left, Izuku approached his master. He didn't have a notebook this time. He had a fully rendered 3D model rotating on his tablet screen. "Master Tetsu," Izuku began, his voice steady with conviction. "I can fix his problem." Kenji leaned over, his sharp eyes taking in the design. It was a pair of sleek, forearm-length gauntlets, designed to integrate seamlessly with Manuel's existing costume. They were covered in small, articulated nozzles, and intricate piping ran along the surface like silver veins. "The hydrofocus gauntlets," Izuku explained, his passion making his words tumble out faster. "They don't generate water, they control it. When he activates his quirk, the water flows from his hands into the gauntlet's internal reservoir. From there, a series of micro-pumps and valves, controlled by myoelectric sensors reading his muscle movements, can redirect the flow. He can fire it from any of the 20 nozzles on each arm. A flex of his pinky finger could create a needle-thin, high-pressure jet for cutting through debris. A clench of his fist could create a wide, gentle mist for decontamination. He could even shape the water into a temporary, swirling shield." Kenji was silent, his gaze fixed on the intricate design. "The control system? Intuitive," Izuku replied instantly. "It would take him less than an hour to master. The gauntlets learn his movements. He just has to think about the shape he wants, and his hand will naturally make the corresponding gesture. It translates intent into action." "This is not a simple repair, Izuku," Kenji said, his voice a low rumble. "This is a complete overhaul of how he uses his quirk. This is top-tier RD. He's a good hero," Izuku said, his voice soft but firm. "He deserves to be better." Kenji looked at his apprentice, at the fire in his eyes. He saw the same spirit that had impressed him years ago, now tempered with skill and confidence. He nodded slowly. "Use the high-grade polymer from the last shipment. And bill him for the materials only. MI's first official commission will be on the house." The next week was a blur of focused creation. Izuku worked with an obsessive precision, 3D printing the custom housing, soldering the delicate myoelectric sensors, and calibrating the microvalves until they responded with perfect, instantaneous accuracy. The finished product was a work of art, functional and beautiful. When Manuel came to pick up his communicator, Izuku, with Master Tetsu standing behind him like a silent, imposing mountain, presented the gauntlets. Manuel was flabbergasted. "For me? But I can't possibly afford something like this." "It's a prototype," Izuku said, using the same line his master had used for Crust. "A field test for a new company, Midorian Innovations. All we ask is that you give it a fair try." Manuel, hesitant but deeply touched, agreed. The results were immediate and staggering. The following week, a low-level villain with a rock-morphing quirk tried to rob an armored car. Previously, this would have been a messy fight for Manuel. He would have had to douse the entire area, causing massive water damage and likely giving the villain a chance to escape. But this time was different. News cameras captured the scene. Manuel arrived, calm and focused. The villain hurled a car door at him. With a flick of his wrist, Manuel generated a thin, whip-like tendril of water that shot out, wrapped around the projectile, and gently set it on the ground. The villain then encased himself in a shell of asphalt and stone. Manuel pursed his lips in concentration, and two needle-thin jets of water, pressurized to an incredible degree, shot from his index fingers. They didn't blast the armor apart. They precisely targeted the seams, cutting through the asphalt like a surgeon's blade. The villain's armor crumbled, and he was disarmed and wrapped in a gentle vortex of water before he could even react. The entire confrontation lasted less than a minute. There was no collateral damage. Not a single window was broken. In the interview that followed, a reporter asked how he had developed such incredible control. Manuel, beaming with a confidence no one had ever seen from him, held up the gauntlets. "It wasn't me. It was my new gear," he said, his voice filled with genuine awe. "They're from a new designer, Midoriyan. I don't know who he is, but he's a genius. He didn't just give me an upgrade. He unlocked my quirk's true potential." The name Midoriyan, spoken on national television, was a stone dropped into the quiet pond of the hero world. And the ripples began to spread. The first ripple was a call from Manuel's agency, formally commissioning a dozen more sets of the Hydro-Focus gauntlets for their other water-based heroes. The next was an email from Fat Gum's agency, inquiring if this Midoriyan had any ideas for support gear that could help with stamina and energy absorption. Then came a message from a hero whose quirk caused painful sonic vibrations, asking if it was possible to design a suit that could dampen the effect on his own body. The dam had broken. Izuku, with Master Tetsu's blessing, officially moved MI's operations out of the workshop's corner and into a small, rented RD lab in a nearby industrial park. It was modest, just 2 rooms and a small office, but it was his. He reinvested every yen of his newfound income back into the company, purchasing advanced fabrication equipment, a state-of-the-art 3D printer capable of working with exotic alloys, a laser cutter, and a sophisticated diagnostic station. He became a phantom, a whisper in the industry. He worked exclusively through encrypted channels and liaisons, his identity a closely guarded secret. His clients knew him only as Midoriyan or MI. They sent him their problems, quirks with dangerous drawbacks, tactical disadvantages, equipment failures, and he sent back solutions. Elegant, efficient, and often revolutionary solutions. He designed a kinetic field stabilizer for a hero whose super-speed quirk was slowly tearing his joints apart. It was a sleek exoskeletal frame worn under the costume, using his patented dampening system to absorb the kinetic backlash and redistribute the force, effectively saving the hero's career. He revolutionized rescue operations by developing advanced biosensors that could be woven into the very fabric of a hero's costume. These weren't just heart rate monitors. They were full-spectrum diagnostic tools that relayed a hero's vitals, stamina levels, and even toxin exposure in real time to a command center. Emergency services could know the exact nature of an injury the second it happened. For the first time, a hero's health was a quantifiable, trackable asset in the field. His reputation grew, built on a foundation of undeniable results. The name Midoriyan became synonymous with quiet genius and life-saving innovation. He wasn't flashy. His gear didn't have explosive brand names or flashy commercials. It was subtle, efficient, and it worked. The heroes who used his tech saw their success rates climb, their injury rates drop, and their careers lengthen. MI became the industry's most valuable secret weapon, and somewhere, in the heights of the most prestigious hero academy in the world, a very intelligent animal was taking notice. Nizu, the principal of UA High School, sat in his office, a cup of jasmine tea steaming in his paws. On the large monitor before him, he had 2 data streams open. On the left was the performance analysis of UA graduates from the last 5 years. On the right was a compilation of incident reports from various hero agencies across Japan. He was a creature of patterns, and he had detected a new one. It started with Manuel, a B-list hero whose performance metrics suddenly spiked by 300%. Then he noticed it with other, seemingly unconnected heroes. A rescue specialist whose average time to victim was cut in half. A combat hero whose quirk-related exhaustion rate dropped by 80%. A stealth hero who successfully completed a record number of infiltration missions. There was no common agency, no shared training regimen. The only connecting thread was a small, subtle maker's mark on their newly upgraded gear. A simple, stylized MI. Niza's whiskers twitched in amusement. He tasked Power Loader, the head of UA's development studio, with investigating this mysterious company. Power Loader, a man who lived and breathed support tech, returned a week later, his helmeted face betraying a rare sense of awe. "It's a ghost, Principal Nizu," Power Loader reported, setting a data slate on the desk. Midorian Innovations. Registered about a year and a half ago. Sole proprietor, one Izuku Midoriya, age 18. No formal engineering degree, no corporate backing. His only listed work history is an apprenticeship at a small, old-fashioned workshop in Mizurufu. Niza's beady eyes gleamed. "And his work? It's paradigm-shifting," Power Loader said, the reverence in his voice unmistakable. "I got my hands on one of the kinetic field stabilizers. The energy dampening system. It's 5 years ahead of anything Detnerad is producing. The power-to-weight ratio is impossible. The biosensors are more accurate than most hospital equipment. This isn't just good engineering, sir. This is artistry." Niza took a thoughtful sip of his tea. Yui prided itself on being at the cutting edge of heroics. Their students received the best training, the best education, and the best support equipment their considerable budget could afford. But according to Power Loader's analysis, the standard issue gear they provided for their first years was now, officially, second-rate compared to the work of this enigmatic teenager. "An artist needs a patron," Niza said, a sly smile spreading across his furry face. "And a canvas. Our first-year students are about to submit their initial costume designs. It is a time of great potential and questionable aesthetic choices." Power Loader understood immediately. "You want to bring him in? Commission him to work on the first-year costumes?" "More than that," Niza corrected. "I want to see what a mind like that does when given access to UA's resources. I want to see how he approaches the challenge of designing for a new generation of quirks. A generation that includes some of the most powerful and volatile potentials we have ever seen." He tapped a file on his screen, one labeled Katsuki Bakugo Quirk, Explosion. "Send an invitation," Nizu instructed. "A formal request for tender. Midorian Innovations is invited to bid for the contract to design and fabricate support systems for the UA Class 1A hero costumes." The email arrived in Izuku's inbox on a Tuesday morning. It was sandwiched between a request for a quote from a hero who could talk to squirrels and a shipping confirmation for a batch of high-grade tungsten. From UA High School Office of the Principal. Subject: Invitation to tender hero course support equipment. Izuku stared at the screen, his heart stuttering in his chest. UA High. The school he had dreamed of attending his entire life. The hallowed halls he had believed were forever barred to him. And now, they were knocking on his door. Not as a student, but as a peer. As a professional. The irony was so thick he could taste it. He felt a tremor of his old insecurities. UA. This was the big leagues. Could he really do it? Could he design for the best of the best, the future top 10 heroes? He thought of Crust scaling that wall. He thought of Manuel's confident smile. He thought of the file on his computer labeled Project, Full Gauntlet for High-Output Kinetic Thermal Quirks, a design he'd subconsciously been working on for years, a design perfect for a quirk like Bakugo's. His fear was replaced by a familiar, burning resolve. This wasn't just a contract. It was a challenge. It was a chance to prove, on the biggest stage imaginable, that he belonged. He stood up and walked out of his small office into the main lab. It was still modest, but it was his kingdom. The hum of the servers, the glow of the monitors, the scent of solder and potential. It was the smell of home. He looked at the advanced fabrication unit in the corner, a machine he had built half of himself from scavenged and custom parts. He looked at the wall of schematics, a testament to 3 years of relentless work. He was no longer the boy who had been rejected. He was the man who had built his own acceptance. He walked back to his desk, his steps sure and steady. He opened a reply email. To UA High School Office of the Principal. Subject, Invitation to tender. Dear Principal Nizu, Midoriyan Innovations would be honored to accept your invitation. We are confident that we can provide support equipment that meets and exceeds the legendary standards of UA High. We look forward to reviewing the student files. Sincerely, Midoriyan, Founder Chief Innovator MI. He hit send. A week later, a heavily encrypted file arrived from UA. It contained the quirk profiles and initial costume sketches for the 20 students of Class 1A. Izuku opened it, and for the first time in years, he felt a powerful, gut-wrenching link to his past. He saw names he recognized from his old school. He saw a girl named Uraraka with a gravity quirk, and his mind instantly began designing gyroscopic balancers to counteract the nausea. He saw a boy with engines in his legs and started sketching aerodynamic plating. He saw a dozen unique, powerful quirks, each one a fascinating puzzle to be solved. And then he saw him, Katsuki Bikugo. Quirk, explosion. His costume request was as aggressive and straightforward as he was. Grenade-themed gauntlets to store his nitroglycerin-like sweat and unleash massive blasts. A militaristic design with no thought given to recoil, heat management, or precision. It was all raw, untamed power. Izuku looked at the crude drawing, and he didn't feel the sting of old wounds. He didn't feel fear or resentment. He felt a profound, professional focus. He saw the flaws. He saw the potential. He saw a hero who needed help, whether he knew it or not. He pulled up his own full gauntlet project file, the one he had been perfecting for years. He began to adapt it, tailoring it to the specific properties of Bikugo's quirk. He redesigned the storage tank for faster sweat-to-explosive conversion. He integrated his patented kinetic dampeners into the arm bracing to absorb the bone-shattering recoil. He added a refined trigger mechanism that would allow for shaped charges, concussive bursts, focused cutting jets, wide-angle flashes for disorientation. He was giving a barbarian a scalpel. He had no idea he was about to build the most important gear of his life for the person who had once told him he was worthless. He was just doing his job. He stood before the sleek, modern RD lab, the MI logo, a subtle, tasteful emblem on the glass door. The lease had taken most of his savings, but it was a necessary step. He was no longer a boy in a garage. He was the head of a company that was about to supply the future of heroism. The sun glinted off the chrome sign, and for a moment, Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless inventor, felt like he was standing on top of the world. The UA contract was a force of nature. It transformed Midoriyan Innovations from a boutique, word-of-mouth operation into a full-fledged RD powerhouse almost overnight. The influx of capital from the most prestigious heroics institution in the country was staggering, but it was the access that truly changed the game. Izuku now had UA's extensive materials science database at his fingertips, a library of exotic alloys and experimental polymers that made his previous resources look like a child's chemistry set. He hired a small, dedicated team, 2 junior engineers he poached from a corporate rival after seeing their innovative work at a tech expo, and a sharp, no-nonsense office manager named Akiko who handled the logistics, allowing Izuku to focus solely on invention. His lab expanded, a new wing housing a massive, multi-axis CNC mill and an advanced materials forge. The space hummed with the quiet, focused energy of creation. Izuku himself, however, remained a ghost. He insisted on it. All communication with UA went through Akiko or encrypted channels. He met with Power Loader only twice, via a heavily distorted video call where his face was shrouded in digital shadow, his voice modulated. He was Midoriyan, the brilliant, reclusive mind behind the curtain. It was a necessary precaution. The revelation that the future of hero support was being crafted by a quirkless 18-year-old would create a media firestorm, a distraction he couldn't afford. More than that, it felt right. His work was the hero. He was just the creator. His first task was the foundational upgrades for the costumes of Class 1A. He pored over their files, his analytical mind alight with the challenge. Each student was a unique problem, a distinct set of variables demanding a custom solution. For Tenya Ida, he didn't just reinforce the leg armor. He designed a sophisticated, lightweight leg brace system with integrated cooling vents. Ida's quirk, engine, generated immense heat. Izuku's design used a closed-loop coolant system, similar to a high-performance car, to draw heat away from Ida's calves, preventing overheating and allowing him to use his reciprocal burst for longer, more sustained periods. The armor plates themselves were aerodynamically sculpted based on wind tunnel simulations, reducing drag by a remarkable 17%. For Achiko Uraraka, he saw beyond her initial, clumsy request for something to help with her nausea. He identified the root cause, a form of vertigo induced by the disconnect between her inner ear's sense of balance and her quirk's effect. His solution was elegant and twofold. First, he designed small, gyroscopic equalizers worn on her wrists and ankles. These devices provided subtle, countervailing feedback, effectively tricking her body's vestibular system into feeling grounded, drastically reducing her nausea. Second, he integrated a miniature grappling hook system into her gloves, not for swinging, but for control. By firing a small, adhesive anchor, she could pivot, pull herself, or change trajectory in zero gravity with pinpoint precision, transforming her from a floating balloon into a master of three-dimensional maneuverability. He worked with a furious passion, tailoring each upgrade with an artist's touch. He gave Momojayorozu a utility belt with cartridges of rapidly accessible base elements, reducing the time and lipid cost of creating complex items. He designed reinforced bracers for Eijiro Kirishima that could absorb and redistribute kinetic energy, preventing his hardened form from shattering under extreme impacts. For Tsuyu Ajiri, he created a temperature-regulating undersuit that would protect her from cold and prevent her from hibernating. But his magnum opus, the project that consumed him most, was for the ghost from his past. It was for Katsuki Bakugo. He took Bakugo's crude, aggressive sketch of grenade gauntlets and saw the raw, untapped potential within. He understood Bakugo's fighting style better than anyone, the explosive mobility, the reliance on overwhelming force. He also understood its weaknesses, the devastating recoil that limited the size of his blasts, the lack of precision, the vulnerability during the recharge phase as he accumulated sweat. Izuku's design addressed every single flaw. The gauntlets he fabricated were masterpieces of combat engineering. The outer shell was a matte black, non-reflective alloy, far more tactical than the bright green Bakugo had drawn. The massive grenade shape was preserved, but it was functional, housing a hyper-efficient storage tank for Bakugo's nitroglycerin-like sweat. Izuku had developed a catalyst agent, introduced via a microdrip system, that stabilized the volatile substance and allowed for a much larger, safer accumulation. The real genius, however, was internal. He integrated his patented kinetic dampening system into the arm braces, reinforced with a carbon fiber exoskeleton that ran up to the shoulder. When Bakugo unleashed a blast, the system would absorb up to 90% of the recoil, channeling the kinetic energy into a series of capacitors. That stored energy could then be used to power a rapid vent system, clearing the chamber for the next shot, or to provide a small, concussive jolt to his fists for close-quarters combat. Most importantly, he revolutionized the firing mechanism. Instead of a simple pin pull, the gauntlets were controlled by a complex pressure-sensitive grip inside the handle. A slight squeeze would release a small, propellant blast for mobility. A full, hard grip would unleash a wide-arc explosion. But by applying pressure with specific fingers, Bakugo could shape the blast. A focused press with his index finger would create a narrow, armor-piercing jet of explosive force, an AP shot. A rolling motion with his thumb would release a blinding, non-lethal flashbang, a stun grenade. He was giving a sledgehammer the precision of a laser. He was giving Katsuki Bakugo the tools to become not just a powerful hero, but a truly great one. As he packed the finished gauntlets into a secure transport case, the small, subtle MI logo etched near the wrist, he felt a strange sense of closure. This was his answer to a decade of taunts. Not revenge, not pity. Just superior engineering. In the Yui locker room, Katsuki Bakugo stared at his new costume. It was perfect. It was better than he had imagined. The black and orange color scheme was sharp, intimidating. The fit was exact, tailored to his physique with a precision that felt both comfortable and empowering. But it was the gauntlets that stole his breath. They were massive, powerful, radiating a sense of latent destruction that resonated with his very soul. He slid his arms into them. The weight was substantial but perfectly balanced, the interior grip molded to his hand as if it had been grown there. "Whoa, Bakugo, those are manly as hell!" Kirishima exclaimed, slapping him on the back. "They look even more terrifying than your drawing," Kaminari added with a nervous chuckle. Bakugo ignored them. He was examining the fine details. The seamless joints, the matte finish that drank the light, the faint hum of a capacitor charging within. This was no student-level work. This was professional grade. Military grade. This was art. Then he saw it. On the underside of the wrist, almost hidden, was a small, laser-etched logo. 2 letters, M and I, intertwined in a simple, elegant design. "M-I," he muttered. "The hell is that?" "That's the mark of the designer," said Ida, adjusting his own new helmet, his voice full of reverence. "Midoriyan Innovations. Principal Niza commissioned them to handle our first-year upgrades. I have been researching them. They are the most revolutionary support item company to emerge in the last 5 years. Their work on the kinetic field stabilizer is legendary." Bakugo's eye twitched. Midoriyan? The name was a phantom limb, an echo from a life he had tried to leave behind in middle school. It sounded so much like. He shook his head, the thought too absurd, too impossible to entertain. Deku? The useless, quirkless, sniveling nerd who used to trail after him with those creepy notebooks? The idea of him creating something this potent was laughable. A cosmic joke. It had to be a coincidence. A stupid, irritating coincidence, but as he clenched his fist, feeling the complex mechanisms within the gauntlet respond to his grip, a nagging familiarity tickled the back of his mind. The design philosophy, it felt like it understood him. It anticipated his needs, compensated for his weaknesses, enhanced his strengths. It was as if someone had spent years studying him, analyzing his every move. The thought was unsettling. He pushed it down, replacing it with the exhilarating thrill of his newfound power. The first trial was a combat exercise in one of UA's urban training grounds. It was here that the true genius of Midoriyan's work was unleashed. Uraraka, once clumsy in the air, became a whirlwind of grace. She used her new grapple lines to whip around corners, to anchor herself in place and create zero-gravity zones with tactical precision. She saved Ida from a fall by tagging him with her quirk, and then gently pulling him to safety with a line, the nausea that once plagued her now a distant memory. She felt, for the first time, not like a girl with a weird quirk, but like a true hero. "Thank you, Midoriyan-san," she whispered to herself, a grateful smile on her face. Ida's new cooling system allowed him to use his recipro burst twice in a row without stalling, a feat that left even his teachers speechless. He moved like a blue and silver blur, evacuating civilian dummies and disabling mock villains with breathtaking efficiency. But all eyes were on Bakugo. When he faced off against Ida in a mock battle, the change was terrifying. Ida came at him in a burst of speed. Bakugo, instead of meeting him with a clumsy, wide-arc blast, simply aimed his gauntlet and squeezed his index finger. A thin, concentrated beam of explosive energy, the AP shot out. It didn't hit Ida, but it struck the ground directly in his path, blasting a crater and forcing the speedster to swerve wildly, his momentum broken. Later, cornered by Kirishima and Sero, he used the stun grenade function. A brilliant, silent flash erupted from his gauntlet, dazzling his opponents for a precious few seconds. It was all the opening he needed. He was no longer just a brawler. He was a tactician. The gear hadn't just made him stronger, it had made him smarter. After the exercise, in the observation room, Power Loader turned to All Might, who was present in his skeletal form. "That Bakugo kid, his control is on another level. That and my gear is a work of genius. It didn't just give him power, it gave him a vocabulary." All Might stared at the screen, a thoughtful, almost pained expression on his face. He watched the replays of Uraraka's graceful flight and Bakugo's precise blasts. "Midoriyan," he murmured, the name tasting strange on his tongue. To have such a deep, intuitive understanding of how quirks work, to enhance them so perfectly. "Who is this person?" Power Loader shrugged. "A mystery. Prefers to remain anonymous." Principal Nisa says he's young, but that's all we know. Whoever he is, he's changing the game. Izuku's game was played on a dozen monitors. In his dimly lit command center, the Yui Sports Festival unfolded like the world's most complex chess match. Each screen showed a different camera angle, a wide shot of the stadium, close-ups on the competitors, and most importantly, telemetry data streaming in from the MI gear worn by the students of Class 1A. He wasn't watching as a fan. He was working. May, get me a thermal reading on Bakugo's right gauntlet. He barked into his headset. Coming right up, Izuku. A cheerful, slightly manic voice chirped back. May Hatsum sat at an adjacent console, her pink dreadlocks bouncing as her fingers flew across a keyboard. After their explosive meeting at the convention, Izuku had recognized her chaotic brilliance as the perfect foil to his meticulous planning. He'd hired her as his head of unconventional RD. She was the only other person who knew his identity, his partner in innovation, his rival, and his closest friend. While he focused on safety and efficiency, she was always pushing the boundaries of what was possible, strapping rockets to things that had no business having rockets. They were a perfect team. Thermal is spiking to 350 Kelvin during the AP shot charge cycle, May reported, pointing to a glowing red graph. The new heat sinks are holding, but just barely. He's pushing my beautiful babies to their absolute limit, Izuku scribbled a note. MK. 2 gauntlets, improve heat dissipation by 15%. Investigate cryo-fluid integration. He watched the cavalry battle, his eyes darting between screens. He saw Uraraka use her grapple hook to steal a headband with a move that was pure, elegant improvisation. He saw Ida use his extended recipro burst to create a last-second breakaway. He saw Tokoyami's dark shadow being held at bay by the focused light from Bakugo's controlled explosions. He was a proud father watching his children succeed. But underneath the pride, a familiar pang of longing echoed in his chest. He saw them down there, in the roar of the crowd, under the blazing sun, living the dream that had once been his. For a fleeting moment he felt the ghost of the quirkless boy on the rooftop, the boy who had wanted nothing more than to be in that arena. He pushed the feeling down, channeling it into his work. That boy was gone. He was Midoriyan now. His fight was here, in the quiet hum of the servers and the glow of the data streams. His victory was their survival. The final match was Bakugo versus Todoroki. It was a cataclysmic battle, a clash of fire and explosions that shook the stadium to its foundations. Izuku watched, his knuckles white, his attention focused entirely on the performance of his gear under extreme duress. He saw Todoroki unleash his fire, a torrent of flame that would have overwhelmed the old Bakugo. But the new Bakugo used his gauntlets, firing small, precise blasts to propel himself through the air, dodging and weaving, turning the arena into his personal playground. He saw the final, massive explosion that won Bakugo the match, a blast so powerful it shattered a huge portion of the stadium. On his monitor, a dozen red warning lights flashed simultaneously on Bakugo's telemetry. Warning, kinetic overload. Dampeners at 110% capacity. Warning, structural integrity of gauntlet housing compromised. Warning, user biometrics indicate severe muscle strain in right arm. He pushed it too far, Izuku muttered, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. The system had held, but just barely. Another 5% power, and the gauntlet would have catastrophically failed, shattering Bakugo's entire arm. MK. 2 gauntlets, he wrote, his handwriting sharp and urgent. Incorporate automatic power limiters tied to users' biometrics. Prevent self-injury. He watched the award ceremony, the sight of Bakugo chained to the podium, snarling and furious, bringing a wry, tired smile to his face. Some things never change. That evening, in the quiet of his dorm room, Bakugo sat on his bed, the first-place medal lying discarded on his nightstand. It felt hollow. He hadn't beaten Todoroki at his best. The half-and-half bastard hadn't used his fire against him until the very end. It wasn't a true victory. His right arm ached, a deep, throbbing pain from the recoil of his final blast. He looked at the gauntlet sitting on his desk. It was scarred and dented, a hairline fracture running down the main chassis. It had taken the brunt of his power, and saved his arm from being turned into pulp. He picked it up, his touch surprisingly gentle. He ran a finger over the smooth, cool metal, over the subtle MI logo. That nagging feeling returned, stronger this time. He thought back to the sludge villain incident years ago. He remembered the stupid, useless Deku, running in with his backpack, muttering about hero weaknesses and support gear. He remembered the creepy notebooks, filled with analysis that was always irritatingly, unnervingly accurate. Your quirk is amazing, Kakin, but you have a slight rightward drift when you use it for propulsion because you favor your dominant hand. If you had counter thrusters on your boots, you could correct it, and fly in a straight line. He remembered Deku saying that to him when they were 10. He'd punched him for it. He looked at his own costume boots, which now had small, almost unnoticeable directional thrusters built into the soles, courtesy of Midoriyan innovations. Thrusters that had allowed him to pull off the complex aerial maneuvers in the festival. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture he didn't want to see. The analytical depth. The focus on efficiency and safety under the guise of power. The intimate, terrifying understanding of how his quirk worked. The name. Midoriyan. No, he whispered to the empty room. No fucking way. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. Deku was a pebble. A worthless, quirkless Deku. He couldn't have done this. He couldn't be this genius. The thought that the source of his newfound power, the key to his evolution, could be the very person he had spent his life looking down on. It was a blow to his pride more devastating than any lost fight. He stood up, his fists clenched. I'm gonna find out, he growled. I'm gonna find out who the hell Midoriyan really is. He had to know. He had to see the face of the ghost in his machine. In his lab, Izuku powered down the monitors one by one, the roar of the sports festival fading into a contented silence. The day had been a resounding success. His gear had performed above expectations, and he had gathered invaluable data for the next generation of upgrades. Mei was slumped in her chair, fast asleep, a half-eaten bag of chips resting on her stomach. Izuku smiled, draping a blanket over her. He walked to the large window of his lab, looking out at the glittering lights of the city. He felt a deep, quiet satisfaction. He wasn't in the spotlight. His name hadn't been cheered by thousands. But he knew. He knew that every cheer for the heroes of Class 1A was, in a small way, a cheer for him. He was the foundation they stood on, the armor that protected them, the unseen force that helped them fly. His identity was a secret. His past was a ghost. But his work was real, and it was saving lives. And for Izuku Midoriya, that was more than enough. He was at peace, unaware of the explosive, ash-blonde storm that was beginning to brew, a storm that was determined to drag his ghosts into the light.